Every once in a while, Tom and I will have a traditional breakfast for supper. Whether it's waffles, French toast, or pancakes, we always enjoy them with fruit like strawberries or blueberries, and of course, maple syrup. I'm Mary Holm, host of Prairie Yard Garden, and in the past, we have done shows on growing strawberries and blueberries, but we have never learned how to make maple syrup until today. Come along as we all learn together.
Funding for Prairie Yard Garden is provided by Heartland Motor Company, providing service to Minnesota and the Dakotas for over 30 years, in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering Asira, pioneers in bringing state-of-the-art technology to our rural communities. Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. And by friends of Prairie Yard Garden, a community of supporters like you who engage in the long-term growth of the series. To become a friend of Prairie Yard Garden, visit pioneer.org/PYG.
I have always wanted to see how maple syrup is collected and made. I mentioned that to my friend Ken Hovitt, and he said, "My neighbor and I make maple syrup pretty much each year." Well, that was probably 4 years ago, and since that time we went through COVID. His neighbor was down with shoulder surgery, and then they had poor sap run because of the weather. This year I called Ken and he said, "We are collecting sap right now. So come and see," and here we are. Thanks, Ken.
Hey, glad to, Mary.
How long have you been making maple syrup?
I started out helping another fellow for about 3 years before I started doing it on my own. And that's kind of where I learned the whole process and what it takes to make maple syrup from maple sap. This now is my second year on my own, doing my own cooking. So,
How did you get started?
you know, I saw an ad in the paper and the guy was looking for help, so I answered it and drove down and talked to him and got the job. Yeah, so that got me started. He was a super nice guy. He had been doing it for many years, but it was getting to where he couldn't get around real well anymore, so he needed somebody to do the work in the woods, which is what I got to do. And so I learned all about that.
Ken, what kind of trees can you collect from?
You can collect from maple trees. Now there's several kinds of maples. There's sugar maples, and there's red maples, and there's silver maples. That's the ones you'll probably find in this area mostly. The sugar maples, the sap has probably the highest percent sugar of all of them. And then the red maples and the rest go down a little bit from there.
Is there an ideal size of tree?
Mostly you want your trees to be 10 inches to a foot in diameter or bigger. You don't want to tap the smaller ones because it gets a little hard on them. Sometimes they don't survive if you get too aggressive with them.
Does it hurt the trees at all to tap them each year?
The larger trees, no, not a bit. If you tap too small of a tree, it can hurt it a little bit. And I suppose it won't necessarily kill them, but it'll set them back.
And then you can tap the same tree year after year. You don't have to let it heal for a time?
Yeah, you can tap the same tree year after year after year. You want to drill your tap hole in a different place each year, because once you pull your tap out, that tree will start to heal that hole, and you don't want to drill into the same scar all the time.
Can you do more than one tap on the same tree?
If it's a big tree, 2 foot diameter or bigger, you can do 2 or 3 taps all the way around the tree.
And is there a certain height that you go to tap the trees?
Whatever's convenient. I usually drill them about this high because that's just where my elbow height is. It's easy to drill. You might as well do it where it's comfortable.
Then what are the tools that you need when you go out to tap a tree?
It's pretty simple, just a hammer and a drill and your taps. And then whatever containers you want to collect the sap in. Some people use plastic bags. Some people use just milk jugs, you know, or some people use a 5-gallon bucket and they'll stand it on the ground and run a hose from the tap into the bucket. That works too.
Does the sap taste different in the beginning of the season of collecting as compared to the end?
Yes, it can. If you collect too long into the season, if you get past the point where the trees are budding or starting to bud, the sap will turn like a yellowish color and it tastes a little green, and you don't want that. No, that's your signal to stop. Then your season is done.
What conditions are needed, or how do you know when to start tapping the trees?
You watch the weather in the spring. Well, ideally the temperatures would be 40 degrees in the daytime and 20 degrees at night. So thaw and freeze, and then they'll be producing sap. No doubt the sap run will start.
How long does the sap usually flow?
Well, that varies each year too. This year we probably had 4 days. We did right here. We're hoping yet this week now, because we have some more ideal weather, that we might get some more. But the trees are starting to bud, so we might be done too. But there's years that it could go for a month too, you know, and that's a super good year. You'd get a lot of sap and a lot of syrup. So,
how do you haul the sap?
we use 5-gallon pails on the ground, the tube from the tap to the bucket. We have a sled that we built that holds a bunch of 5-gallon pails. It goes out and collects into the pails. He'll bring that all back to his shop and he dumps that into a larger tote tank. When that tank gets full, then he'll bring it over here to me.
Do you ever have to worry about critters trying to get into your sap?
It can happen. Now in the 5-gallon pails, they always have lids on them, so nothing's going to get in there. We're pretty safe.
Could you show me how to actually tap a tree?
Absolutely. I have a demo right over here and I'll show you.
In addition to their stunning beauty, flowers and plants provide many benefits to our daily lives. Foremost, they provide a safe and nutritious habitat for our pollinator insects, who in turn help grow our food by sharing pollen among the plants they visit along their travels. 3/4 of the world's flowering plants and about 35% of the world's food crops depend on pollinators to reproduce. But did you know that many plants grown right here in Minnesota provide therapeutic or medicinal properties for humans? Plants have been used as a reputable method of healing for thousands of years. Herbs, for example, are a great source of natural compounds used for a natural approach to prevention, healing, and health support. At the Lamb Shop and Wellness Center outside of Hutchinson, they feature a full line of natural foods, organic produce, healthy personal care items, and more that derive from all natural plant-based sources. Connie Carsons created the Lamb Shop and Wellness Center to help empower health and wellness for people of all ages in a beautiful country setting nestled quietly along the banks of the Crow River.
Not only do plants contain a ton of vitamins and minerals, but they also have a lot of medicinal therapeutic properties. It could be antibacterial, antifungal, antimicrobial. Plants contain all kinds of medicinal properties, and that's why it's so important for us to use our foods as medicine.
It's a whole life approach, from when and where we eat to where our food comes from and how our food was produced. The Lamb Shop provides grass-fed, farm-raised meats, including lamb, beef, chicken, eggs, and turkeys, raised naturally on the farm without the use of hormones, antibiotics, or exposure to pesticides, fresh from their farm to your table. To find out more about all natural health, nutrition, and wellness options near you, visit minnesotagrown.com.
So Mary, I'd like to show you how I tap a tree. And what I use, first of all, is a tap. Well, this is one kind of a tap. There's many different kinds of taps. This is just a plain metal tap. Some are made from plastic and some are bent around different shapes, but this is a basic tap. There's even some folks that just use a short piece of pipe about that size too. Nothing special about these at all. And then you need a drill to make the hole. Pretty basic, plain old drill. And then when you're done tapping and you finally pull your taps out, maybe the season is over, some people will plug that hole and some people don't. If you do plug it, most folks will make just a plain old wooden plug. You can get square pieces of wood like this at a lumber yard, cut them off and sharpen them a little bit, and you just tap that into the hole as kind of a seal. And then the other thing about that plug is that next year when you come to tap that tree, you'll see right away where you were the year before. The plug is easy to recognize. So, and to tap the tree then, take your drill, and then we're going to want to go in about that far, probably the first joint in my thumb. But you want to get it deep enough so your tap goes in as far as it can. So other than that, you're not going to gain anything by going halfway into the tree. So this is a 3/8 inch bit, and you use different sized bits depending on what kind of tap you have. Some taps are smaller diameter, so you'd use a smaller bit. So to tap, usually find your spot on the tree, tilt your drill about that kind of an angle. Again, it's not critical, but it's just so your tap, when you stick it in the hole, it points down so it'll run out. And you just about that far. And so then you have your hole. Then you take your tap and your hammer. You stick that in there. And you're all done. That's it. That's tapping a tree.
How long does it take the sap to start flowing after you put the tap in?
If you're right on the verge of the trees starting to produce sap, it'll probably run almost immediately. Now some of them will just drip really slow. Some of them will be a little stream coming out. Depends on the tree. So the next thing to do here now would be, depend on what you're going to collect your sap in. But you could put a hose on the end of this and then into like a 5-gallon pail. Or there's holes here, you can hook a wire on there and hook a little pail, or you can hang a plastic bag on that. There's all kinds of ways to collect sap, so it's whatever you have and what you want to use. But that's your tap.
And how long does it take to fill the pail?
Well, if it's a 5-gallon pail and if it's a good tree, you probably want to be there every third day pretty easily, or it'll start to run over.
So when you are done, you pull this back out. How do you get it back out? Is it hard?
The other end of your hammer.
Okay.
Just hook that on that tap and he'll pop out. And then for those that like to plug their hole, you'd stick a plug in it. The same plug I just showed you. And you tap that in and you're all done. That's it.
Okay.
And that tree then will heal around that plug and it'll be just like nothing ever happened.
So then, while you're collecting, you bring it back and you put it into this big tank then?
We do, yes. Yep.
And how long can you hold that sap until you start cooking it?
It has a lifespan. Depends on what your storage conditions are like. If you're able to keep it cool, you're probably good for 5-6 days, a week maybe. If it's warm, it can get sour on you, and then you got to dump it. Fellow that I work with that collects the sap, he keeps his tank in his shop, and it stays pretty cool.
If we get a batch of bad weather, do you have to worry about the sap freezing at all?
It will freeze. I've experienced that before. We had sap in a big tank and we hadn't gotten around to cooking it yet. and it froze that night. So there's this iceberg floating around on top. If you take that ice out and throw it, all you're doing is throwing away plain water. So you're really concentrating that sap more yet. It's almost like boiling it. Yeah, it'll freeze and you can get ice in it, but it's only pure water that freezes. So the sugar stays in the bottom.
So then you have a couple of these big containers like this for your sap?
The guy that I work with has a tank just like this one. And when that gets full, he'll put it in the back of his pickup and he'll come over here and we'll empty it into this tank.
How much sap do you collect before you start cooking it down?
I like to have a full tank. This is a 300-gallon tank. The reason I like a full tank is because when I fill the boiler to start out with, it's all just plain sap. And it takes a whole day of cooking before you can finally get some concentrated sap that you can draw off and then go finish in a different cooker. It takes 30 gallons just to fill the boiler. So you like to start out with enough, and then you're going to continually add to it throughout the day as it evaporates, as the moisture evaporates away. So you have to have a good supply to get started.
Ken, what happens if you start and then you get a heavy rain or snow or whatever? Can you hold it and then restart it?
Yeah, I go in the house and watch TV.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't cook 24 hours a day. Some people do, I don't. But when it comes later in the evening, I'll just quit feeding wood into the boiler and just let it burn out, and then it'll cool, and I'll come out after it gets dark and I'll put covers on it and sit that way overnight. Next day I stoke it full of wood, light it up, and away we go again.
Well, you need to show me your whole process for cooking off the sap and making it into syrup too.
I would be glad to.
I have a question. In times of drought, parts of my lawn turn brown. Should I be concerned about that?
Yeah, so we've had 3 years in a row now where we've had a pretty severe drought, and so many of our lawns have been struggling, and it's that cumulative effect of over time we've just been losing a little bit more grass, and so in some cases we've had an invasion of certain weeds and just created space for different pests and weeds and things like that to take hold. And so people are probably noticing their lawns may looking a little bit thinner, maybe look a little bit browner, or the encroachment of weeds. So I'm kneeling here at the Arboretum in a lawn that's unirrigated and receives very little pest control, but it's a great example of what homeowners have been noticing in their lawns lately. This is really dry, thin turf, and really what you're seeing is, in some cases, sometimes the grass is actually dead, but most often it's just going in through a stage of dormancy. It's just a drought avoidance mechanism for the lawns to basically wait until there's more rainfall that they can use. My recommendation is just to wait until we get a little bit more predictable rainfall and see what comes back from your lawn and how it responds to these drought conditions. If and when we do get a little bit more predictable rainfall, you'll know if you did actually lose any grass in that area, and if you did, that's when I would consider overseeding sometime this fall with another cool season turfgrass species that is a little bit more drought tolerant, a little bit more drought resistant, things like the tall fescue or the fine fescues.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chaska, dedicated to welcoming, informing, and inspiring all through outstanding displays, protected natural areas, horticultural research, and education.
Okay, so Mary, I'm going to walk you through my process here. When my partner brings sap to me, he brings it over and he puts it in my holding tank, which is just a tote. And from the holding tank then, I've got a pump in there that'll pump it up into this elevated tank that's up on stilts, basically. And the reason I put it up there is so that it can flow by itself down to the boiler. Okay, and I don't have to keep a pump running to do that. And then it'll just gravity flow down to the boiler. And that has a float valve on it that line goes into, and that float valve serves the purpose to keep the sap level in the boiler at a constant. Because as you're boiling it, you're getting rid of a lot of the water, and so if you didn't keep refilling it, it's going to get lower and lower and lower. So the float valve will keep that level constant all the time. As it goes into the boiler, it makes quite a long pathway through a bunch of channels and loops in the boiling pans, and by the time it gets to the last compartment or the last channel, by that time it's concentrated enough I can draw it off, and I will periodically draw off 2 to 3 gallons, and then I take that over to another pot with on top of a gas burner, and I boil it to finish it then. So it's easier that way. I have more control on the end product that way. The boiler here works good to get it mostly concentrated, but it's kind of a crude process. It's hard to control to a real good degree. So,
What are you using to heat underneath here? I can feel the warmth coming up.
feels good. Just wood, yeah. I buy slab wood from one of the local sawmills, and it's generally always hardwood, which heats the best too. So,
What is happening here?
what happens in the boiler here, the way this one is designed, is that the raw sap, basically the sap from the trees, comes in through here. As you can see from the beginning here, it's basically raw sap. I mean, just about like water. It doesn't have any color to it. There's channels in the boiler here. It comes in there, goes around twice, goes out, comes into this pan, goes across the back of it, out and back through this pan, and follows the pathway all the way through to the draw-off point here. All the time that it's making that trip, it's boiling and it's concentrating. There's water leaving it or moisture leaving it all the way along. And so when you get to the end, here's halfway through, you can see it's a little more concentrated, a little darker in color.
Yep.
Okay. And then as you get a little farther on down the line, it's more yet. Okay. And then when you get to the draw-off point here, now it's concentrated.
Now it looks like syrup.
Yeah, it's starting to look like syrup. So as you put sap in one end, it's constantly pushing all the way back to draw-off point.
So now then you're saying draw off point. So when it gets here, look, you've got a spigot here.
Yes.
How do you get it from here over to your final cooking area?
I take a big pot and I set it down on the ground under that spigot, and I just put about 3 gallons in there. And then I take that and I pour it into the next, through a filter and into the next boiling pot. So.
And how long does that last section take to finish making the syrup?
It'll take about an hour, hour and a half. You want it to have a little thickness, but if you overcook it, it's still good syrup, nothing wrong with it, but it'll start to sugar in your jars, like sometimes honey will do in your cupboard. Maple syrup will do the same thing if you concentrate it too much, so you don't want to overcook it either. Kind of want to watch that pretty close when you make it.
How do you know?
I use a hydrometer to check it, and I check it every few minutes just to make sure it's the right consistency. The hydrometer actually measures the specific gravity of the syrup. The higher the sugar concentration, the higher the hydrometer will float in it. And it has a stem on it with markings, and that's how you check where the concentration is and when you're done.
What temperature do you cook this at, and do you have to worry about burning it?
Should never have to worry about burning it unless for some reason the sap level in your pans get too low. It'd be like running a pan out of water on your stove, basically. And temperature I don't worry about. I just need to get it warm enough to boil. Don't have to worry about exactly what temperature that is. So there's a thermometer on the draw-off point here, and I do watch that, and that gives me an indication when it's ready to draw some off. As sap becomes more and more concentrated with sugar, its boiling point goes up. So that thermometer will tell me about where, based on the temperature, about where that concentration is. And it just gives me an indication when to draw it off and then go finish it.
So then you take it and you actually move it to another cooking area.
Yes.
And why do you do that?
Because the other one is much easier to control. I can control it more precisely. The boiler here does a good job of concentrating it, but it's kind of a crude thing to try to control precisely. And it just doesn't lend itself well to do that. But the other cooker, I heat that with propane, and it's really easy just to adjust the knob and get it just right. So, and much easier to check on.
How long does it take you to cook a batch of syrup?
This boiler here, I can go through about 17 gallons of sap each hour. So if you have 50 gallons of sap, that's going to be about 3 hours of cooking.
How much syrup do you get from a big tank of sap?
That tank on the stand there is 180 gallons. And it takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. It takes a lot of boiling. Maple sap, or I suppose any sap from any tree, it has the amount of sugar in it, which is what you're after, but it also has minerals in it. But when you boil that sap, those minerals will form almost a gritty sand, and that's what I like to strain out. Now, sometimes in the bottom of a jar of maple syrup, you might see a little bit of that. It's certainly nothing that's ever going to hurt you. It's probably nutritious, but it just means that his strainer didn't quite do a perfect job.
So you get it all cooked down to where you want it to be. Then how do you keep it? How do you preserve it?
We put it in pint or quart canning jars, and then if we think we're going to keep it for, I don't know, 3-4 months or longer, we'll actually can it. We'll put it in a water bath canner and can it. And then the jars seal and they'll be good for a long time. You just keep them in a cool place and it'll be great shape.
How long does your syrup last then?
Well, I've kept it for 2 years pretty easily.
And what do you do with it all?
Oh gosh, pancakes, waffles, ice cream, coffee, gifts for the neighbors or friends or enemies or whoever. Yeah, yeah. But it has no problem finding a home. No.
Well, thank you so much. This is something I've wanted to see for years, and I just appreciate you showing us. Thank you so much.
Absolutely glad to have you here.
Funding for Prairie Yard Garden is provided by Heartland Motor Company, providing service to Minnesota and the Dakotas for over 30 years. In the heart of truck country, Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering Asira, pioneers in bringing state-of-the-art technology to our rural communities. Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. And by friends of Prairie Yard Garden, a community of supporters like you who engage in the long-term growth of the series. To become a friend of Prairie Yard Garden, visit pioneer.org/PYG.